Welcome back to the MMA Museum podcast. I'm Miguel Dorati, and I am very lucky to be joined by Ron Waterman. Ron, how are you?
I'm doing great, Miguel. Thanks for having me on, buddy.
Terrific, man. The H2O man made his appearance in MMA in 1999 for the first time at the Boss Rutan Challenge. But what was going on before that? Are you a Denver native?
I am. I was a college wrestler up at the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley, and I
Okay.
was actually a high school teacher at the time.
Okay. Now let's take it back to '93 because Denver would have had the first UFC there in
That's right.
November. Were were you watching it? Were you working? Where were you? What was going on in your life then?
I was actually a high school art teacher and a wrestling coach at the high school that I graduated from, and coaching the wrestling team. And I remember that very first UFC event and thought, man, this is something that I'd like to do sometime. And finally had the opportunity.
No, but did you go think about going to the event live or missed out on the event live or?
I was actually working during that, so yeah, I couldn't get to it.
Okay, that's cool. Well, it took you a little bit of time. Now, were you into fighting? Like, were you like a street fighter, a bouncer, or is it just like the wrestlers that like to test themselves?
It was definitely of the wrestlers that wanted to test themselves. That's kind of what I saw. I saw all these wrestlers that were being extremely successful in the UFC. So I was like, man, this is something that I think I could be successful at. And my wrestling team at the time challenged me to enter the Boss Rutan Invitational, and I took them up on it, and the rest is kind of history from there.
Yeah, now the Boss Rutan Invitational goes down in Denver, and these were
Yep.
at the time legendary shows. I recently talked to Boss about them too. So, um, Boss is around that time. He's the big Pancrase champion, maybe even UFC title holder right then.
Yep.
And he brings in John Peretti, the then UFC matchmaker, to be his referee. So this is a clear door if you've got some talent to get right into the UFC. Did you know that walking in? Did you know those people walking in, or were you just walking in cold?
I was pretty much walking in cold. I had heard the rumor, that the winner of this competition could get a invite to the next UFC, so that was definitely motivation for me. But
Okay.
I didn't know Boss Rutan, I didn't know Peretti.
Were not keeping up with the? I know it was hard to see the UFCs at that point with pay per view being.
Exactly. Yeah, it was so new
Okay,
that I
cool.
hadn't
So
really been even following it much.
let's break this. There's a Boss Root Invitational. Boss, obviously, a great guy, Hall of Fame fighter. But how
Yep.
about running the show? Is he? I think he's an upper management guy running the show in the nitty gritty of a show. Was that crazy? What did you face when you walked in there? Because as a wrestler, I think you're used to structure, and that's probably not what was going on there. Why don't you describe the difference?
It was a little chaotic. I'm used to going to wrestling tournaments and having multiple matches in one day and sitting all day for these tournaments. And so that's kind of what I was expecting. Just another, I knew there'd probably be two or three fights in one night and didn't know anything about anybody that would be there or how many people would be there in my weight class. And so, I weighed in earlier in the day and met all these guys that I'm going to be fighting against. A couple of them rang bells. That I knew had been in previous UFC competitions, and I just had that mindset that I'm a pretty dang good wrestler, and I think my odds are pretty good. So I entered the competition and didn't even really know John until my second fight. He was officiating all the fights that night and had saw my first couple of fights and came up to me backstage and said, "Hey, I want you to take it easy on this guy.
Mhm.
Don't go all out, don't hurt him." So I took it easy a little bit and took him down. And John calls the fight like within probably 20 seconds because I'm just pounding this guy. And his corner just throws a fit and gets in John's face and says, "There's no way you should have stopped this early." So Brady walks over to my corner and says, "No more holding back." He goes, "You have free reign on this guy now." So pretty much just the same thing. I take him right down to the mat and start pounding him again. And his nose just smashes, blood's all over the place. And Preddy calls the fight the second time and he says, Is that what you wanted?
Yeah, yeah, you did that. That's your fault.
Yeah, right. You did
Uh,
that. Yeah.
yeah. Now at this point, though, that's your second fight. He's probably already noticed you because the athleticism, the size and stuff. I bet you met somebody named Phyllis Lee that day too.
He put me in contact with Phyllis Lee right after that tournament because I went to him and I talked to him about management, and he gave me Phyllis's number that night, and I was on the phone with her. So start
Okay.
of a great management career.
Were you happy with Phyllis?
Oh, I was super happy with her. I loved her.
Good. Yeah, she's one of those people that she's old school. God
Oh
rest her.
yeah.
She used to send a lot of her guys over to hook and shoot and stuff, and they all tell stories about how they'd be short a couple $100 here and there and stuff. But you gotta love her. You gotta love her anyway.
Yeah, she was awesome. She got me into Japan and did a great job for me. I was always very happy with Phyllis.
Yep. Now that this Boss Rutan Invitational got a few people in the UFC. It was also a time where they were looking at smaller weight classes. I think Dwayne Ludwig was there, but you get the
Yep.
call almost right away. Like you're in UFC 20, and they're going to bring you in. Uh, that was somewhere down south, but yeah. What was that like? What was the money offer like? What are they giving you at this point?
Geez, I know for the Boss Shooting Invitational, I made $500 for three
Yeah.
fights in one night and I won a big trophy. But yeah, John said, "Why don't you come out to UFC 19 and watch it with me?" And I ended up actually rooming with John that night and watching the event, and then I was signed for UFC 20.
Mhm. Now,
The
what was Peretti like? Because Peretti is one of those uh kind of like unknown figures at this point. You know what I mean? But very controversial in terms of just a straight shooter. He must have liked you. I mean, I think it comes down
Yeah,
with him whether he liked you or not.
absolutely, yeah, and he was super blunt, just said what was on his mind, and super knowledgeable about the sport. But he was my ticket in for sure that night, and got me my very first contract. And geez, I'm trying to remember even what it was now, but it wasn't a lot of money. It was
Was it like
probably,
2000 and 2000?
I was thinking like 3 or 4 thousand for the
Okay.
first fight. Yeah,
All right. That's a little bit of respect in those days. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And
right back then.
yep, much deserved, I guess. But you said he was blunt. Now let's be blunt about this. You show up at UFC 20. I'm sure that everybody, Phyllis and the whole thing is geared toward that's the big show. You're going to go to the big show, and the competition's real and stuff. And really, they laid an egg on this one. I think, one of the commissioners, a guy named Ted Mullen, perhaps had a protege that he put in the UFC, and they kind of took him on a recommendation. And the guy shows up, Chris Kondo. Much respect to Chris because he showed up and he stepped into the ring and stuff. But this was a mismatch. Like, what's your take on this? Why don't you, before I say anything?
I just looking at the guy, but looks are so deceiving. I was a college wrestler and I wrestled guys that looked just like Chris Kondo, that were studs, that had great cardio, and they were nothing to be a pushover. So my mind is always, I'm going to go give it my all and go after this guy. And again, Peretti comes up to me before the fight and says, "We've got to make this fight last. I don't want you to just go out there and squash this guy." And so he goes, "Make this a contest." So, and then right before we were about ready to go out, he said the fight might not happen because Kondo's blood pressure was way too high and the doctors weren't going to let him go out and fight. So finally he got cleared and the fight happened, and my instincts kind of took over, and I think it lasted maybe 25 or 30 seconds
Yeah.
and the fight
Yeah,
was over. But
this was a situation where, when you go back to the old days, Joe Silva. Joe Silva would tell you about the eye test. You got to look like a fighter. And that was a
right.
little bit of the problem with Chris, is that Chris kind of looked like he could outdrink Tank Abbott. You know what I mean? He was a big, heavy guy, and Peretti like the big bodies too. So it was a kind of thing where he was very put down before the fight by the crew and stuff. And you're a gentleman. I mean, you weren't part of that, but the whole atmosphere there must have just been heavy. How did you? I mean, you got the winner's purse, so you can't complain, right?
No, I wasn't complaining. I mean, it was a start to my career, so a win's a win for me.
Now you realize obviously that things are going to get tougher.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
So now they call you up in the very next UFC 21. So you're on the radar and you know getting booked solidly here, a second fight. But now you run into another problem. This is another throwback fight because what did Andre Roberts weigh for this fight?
Oh, he was well over 300 pounds, probably the
Yeah, this is
350 range. Yeah,
yeah, this is the old school days, and I don't think maybe later on in life Andre could have made 265, but there wasn't a chance in heck that he was going to make it in those days.
no
He was,
way.
he was a big guy, but you get a big, tough Native American guy, with some of the, cliches that come with their fighters, where they take punishment to give it and stuff, and he's big and tough. How was this fight for you? What do you remember of it?
Oh, it's one of those that kind of comes back and haunts you all the time because I had it just so under control and was just about to end the fight. Big John's in both of our ears the whole time saying, Andre, you got to do something. Come off the fence. You got to show me something. I'm going to stop this fight. It broke his nose earlier in the fight, and they stopped it for a while, and they let him go back and fix his nose up. And he came back, and I had him on the rope or up against the cage, just punching him. And out of the blue, I just dropped my guard. I was just ready, trying to finish the fight, not thinking about any defense. And he came with this big old round, big cross. It just caught me right on the chin with it, and I just started spinning. Probably the first time I'd ever been hit hard.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a learning on the job.
yeah, right. Yeah, so you learn from those hard mistakes sometimes, but that was a good learning experience for me. But it was a hard one. It was a hard one to take because I knew I had the fight finished and could have easily finished the fight. Just
Yeah.
dropped my hands and got caught, and that's all it takes.
Yep. Now, what are you doing for training? Are you still basically wrestling, or are you looking at working your hands and kicking and some of the submission stuff? What's the diversity like? Because at this point, maybe you have like a baby Nathan Markhart popping up in Denver and a couple of people like that. Are you? Where are
Yeah.
you? What fill me in.
Yeah, so I got connected with a group called Colorado Stars, Nate Marquardt, Dwayne Ludwig, and a couple other UFC guys were in there. And I was teaching all day, then coaching, then driving down at night after that to Denver about an hour and training 3 or 4 nights a week. But there was no camps back then, and I was still a full time teacher, so I was just trying to round up everybody I could to help get me ready for fights when they were coming up. But my stand up game, my boxing was super limited, and I mean I was pretty much just a pure wrestler that was could do stuff on the ground now that I couldn't do as a wrestler. But so learning
Yeah.
the submission game.
Okay. Now, your next fight, you get another call, UFC. So you're doing well in terms of recognition and stuff. And I don't think they skipped any here. Yeah, you've been in 2021 and 22.
Yep,
Now,
yep.
isn't Tim Lachik from Denver too?
No, he was from California. He was a teacher out in California,
Oh, okay. Okay. All
but he
right.
was at the Boss Root Invitational.
Okay. So you had to realize that, there's a different animal than Chris Kondo, a little bit of that Andre Roberts, but at least he's more your size. He's actually smaller than you.
Yep.
Well, what went on in this fight? What are your memories of it? Because he's a big tough guy.
Yeah. So I've got a week prior to the fight, training at Colorado Stars and snap my bicep clear off the bone, goes rolling up in my arm. And I was one of those guys that there's no way I was going to cancel this fight, didn't want to back out of it. So didn't say anything to anybody and just went into the fight. But I had basically one arm. My right arm was completely gone. My bicep was clear up in my shoulder. So I knew I wasn't going to be able to punch much with it. So I just wanted to take him down and see if I could control it on the ground and beat him on the ground. So it was a little bit of a disadvantage for me, but I thought that fighting how I did, and then I got called in the first round. I got called for a low blow, which cost me a point at the time, I think, which ended up after the whole thing ended up in a draw. So I was Another
Yeah.
one a little bit disappointed with, but I pretty much controlled the fight the whole 3 rounds.
What fighting with that injury though? What's going on with medicals at this point? They like shouldn't a doctor have spotted that and said, "Nope, don't do that"? What was going
Oh,
on?
if I would have voiced it, absolutely they wouldn't let me fight. So, but no one could really tell until after the fight that it was huge. It was twice the size of my other arm. But I just
Okay.
flew home the next day afterwards, and it was pretty interesting. I flew right on the airplane flying back. I sat right next to Tim. We both had big shiners, and
Hey,
but
sometimes those shared experiences though, those are the ones you remember. You know what I mean? It's
that's
like
right. Yeah,
and
flew
and,
back,
and
got my arm fixed, and then got invited back to the UFC Japan in a couple months after that. So
yep, and that's a nice break for you too. Because um, you're a poster boy kind of guy, and they like that poster boy, that big heavyweight kind of guy too. So Phyllis probably went over there with the other plane ticket and
yes, she
create
did.
some connections for you. You know what I mean? Because
Uh-huh.
that's what it took. They came from that old pro wrestling mentality of a booker. We don't really have that booker in, an independent booker in MMA nowadays. And in Japan, that's what they use. The Kawasaki was one of the bookers
Yep.
for Pride. So
Yep.
she came from that model, and she took a percentage of your money and a percentage of your money before and after. You know what I mean? But um, the Japan thing was good. Talk about the UFC Japan fight for you, because that was now you're 2-1-1 in the UFC, and that's a real good resume at the time.
Yeah, it was pretty cool because they had our U.S. Military base was over there, and a bunch of those guys were in attendance. I actually knew a couple of guys that were there from the military base, so it was neat having them in the crowd. But I was super prepared for this fight. I got myself in really good shape, and my cardio was real good. And fought a guy named Satoshi Honma that took a lot of beating in that fight because I was took him down the whole fight and elbowed and kneed and punched, and he did not tap out. But it was pretty much a unanimous decision.
And you retired him. I mean, he was a guy that had a little bit, probably about 10 or 15 fights before that, but that was his last one. So, pretty good beating there. And then you start popping up on Pancrase shows. So it's like what was Phyllis is wheeling and dealing. Were you getting sit down treatment, or was she doing the work and you're sitting in the hotel room?
She did all the booking and stuff and got everything lined up for me. And then obviously when I get over there, I've got lots of interviews set up and a little bit of showmanship. I was breaking baseball bats and blowing up hot water bottles and breaking out of handcuffs. So the Japanese just ate that stuff up when I would do that for the press before the fights. And but Pancrase was a lot of fun. They treated me great. Totally different because I'm fighting in a ring now instead of a cage. The
Mm-hmm.
rules are a little bit different, but all my Pancrase competitors were great guys, and we had some good fights over there.
Yeah, the thing about Pancrase is now you're kind of dealing with, you know, kind of like the amateur wrestling world. It's like they're almost like pro amateurs. You know what I mean? It's like once you get to a certain level, that's what you do. So these guys did that. There wasn't any of that anger. And that seems to fit your personality. You don't need to get, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you want to correct me, but you don't need to get pissed off at your opponent to compete.
No, no, no. I never fought like that. I was always I'm a super intense competitor, but uh, never had any anger against any of my opponents. Didn't hate any of my opponents. I mean, I would walk up and give them hugs after the fight.
Yeah.
I just respected them for being in there with me. So
Now, at some point, did Pancrase ask you to go over there to, teach or stay over there for a month or a prolonged period of time, or did you just go over there for the fights?
I think I was pretty much just over there for the fights. I mean, pretty much I'd go over there for almost a week ahead of time and fight and fly back a couple of days after.
And at this point, you're still balancing work, school.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, still
Yeah.
working at the same time, still teaching.
So now, if Japan had come to you for an offer and say, spend 6 weeks training at the Pancrase, you probably would have had to turn it down.
Yeah, because I mean, I wasn't making enough money in mixed martial arts then to support my family. I mean, I had two boys and a wife at the time, and a nice house that I had to
Yeah,
support. So it
we'll
would have
get
been
to
hard.
we'll get to one of
Yeah.
your boys in a little while here. um, so Kengo Watanabe was your first opponent. That was Pancrase's anniversary show in 2002. So this was kind of one of their bigger shows, like a fun show. What's your memory of that?
Um, I remember them building Kingo up big because he was like a big soccer star or something over there that it turned into mixed martial arts, and uh,
Yeah,
knew that I had a game plan going into every fight. I was pretty much just a wrestler, and I was going to take everybody down and finish them on the ground. And at this point, I was getting pretty good at some submissions, so felt pretty comfortable with that Americana
yeah.
and
Now, do
get
you
that
think
on almost all.
you think that what do you think he weighed? Because sometimes the Japanese exaggerate a little bit. Was he pumped up?
Yeah, he was a big dude. He was taller than I was.
Oh, okay,
I would put him at probably 250.
okay, all right. That's fair. Then
Yeah.
because sometimes you walk in there and you get a mismatch, but he I think was yeah, more of a mismatch on the talent end with that. So that's the 2002 Pancrase anniversary show. At that point, uh, you get the call to Pride. Now, this is a jump you should feel from Pancrase's event, even though it was an anniversary show. It's still a smaller show, and you go right into Pride 24, which is basically the heyday of Pride. So, talk about how all that came about.
I mean, Phyllis did all the work for me. She ended up setting up that debut in Pride for me. And I'd known about Pride and the just a three times the size of a show that it was for Pancreas. So I walk in there and they've got this big drum wall and this big long walk to the ring, and I knew very little about my opponent at that time. Um,
Valentine Overeem.
Yep, yep. All Star was in his corner. His brother was his corner man, so he wasn't a big deal back then at the start. But I
Yeah.
had I think I had who was it? I had Kevin Randleman and Mark Coleman were helped corner me for the fight.
Okay. Okay, because I noticed on the Pancrase shows you were probably working with Alex Stiebling.
Yeah,
Does that sound
yeah,
familiar? Because Stiebling would have been over there with Phyllis as well.
yep, yep.
So, in that respect, she got you exposed to, people that were on a certain path and and professionalism. Were you hoping? Was it were you just saying, look, I'm going to go over there, make some money, come home and do my thing? Or did you harbor a secret hope that you'd be able to do this for a living?
Um, I think I hoped that I could, and just wanted to keep moving up the ladder with Pride or whatever organization I was with. I wanted to be, a champion, one of the best fighters out there. So I just kind of took it fight at a time, though.
Yeah. Now, the Pride fight, uh, let me just get back on track here. So, Pride, Valentine Overeem. So, this is the twin brother of Alistair, who, is a UFC, icon at this point. Valentine kind of, went and took a different path. He actually retired earlier and didn't fight anymore. But there was a time where Valentine was rated ahead of Alistair. What was he like? What do you remember of this guy? He kind of a forgotten legend.
Yeah, I knew he was a good Muay Thai fighter, good hands, good kicks. So again, I was just going to stick to my game plan and get him down to the mat as soon as possible. So that's exactly what I did. Circled him back into my corner and took him down, slammed him pretty good, and hooked up that Americana and ended up dislocating his shoulder in the fight.
At this point, I think you were probably 50 pounds. They hadn't found the horse meat yet over there because you're probably 50 pounds bigger than him. Did that make you feel comfortable throwing him around?
Yeah, I mean he was also a pretty well built guy and pretty strong.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I definitely had to size and strength advantage on almost all of my opponents.
Now we got back to World Extreme Cage Fighting. So the WEC, and this is WEC 7. You come back to the States, and you're the main event against James Navarez. What do you remember about this show?
They actually switched my opponent up. The guy was supposed to fight. I can't remember what his name was. I think it was Sims or something, and he backed out like a couple days before, and they threw in James Navarez as a backup fighter for him. And he was another pretty tough kid. He took a lot of beating. He was
Yeah,
on the ground the whole time, just getting hammered. But it was kind of cool because I was sponsored by Tap Out, one of the very first guys that was sponsored by Tap Out back then, and those guys were all at the fight and got to see me win my very first belt. So that was kind of exciting.
cool, cool. Yeah, and those WEC belts, at the end of the day, WEC is a good company in the history of this stuff. Was it Wes Sims?
No, it wasn't Wes Sims. I knew Wes, but
Okay.
another guy. I don't even know his name now.
Okay, no problem. No problem. We'll clear West. That's my bad. That
Yeah,
wasn't you.
no,
um, so we move on from Navarro's. Now you're go to the IFC Global Domination. If I remember, this is back in Denver, and this is a tournament kind of for the ages on the lightweight, and then you're like one of the feature fights in the heavyweight
right.
division. What do you remember of this tournament?
It was kind of cool getting to fight at home in front of my home crowd, and was back at the Pepsi Center there, and it was a pretty big venue, so it was neat to get to fight in front of all those people. It was right in the middle of a program that I was doing at my home church with the strength team that I used to travel with. So I had to shoot from that event right down to the Pepsi Center and fight that night. So all those big guys that were with me were in my corner that night. It was kind of cool to get to fight in front of them.
That's cool. That's definitely cool. That the camaraderie of the old wrestling thing
Yeah,
sometimes doesn't carry over to MMA, but here it did. Um what do you remember of the IFC event? Because I think there was chaos at this event too. The tournament, the guys were like they got their show money, and it's like, okay, what if I win two fights and lose one? And there was no money. It was like you get 50,000 to win or your show money, and everybody. Do you remember any of the rule meeting or any chaos?
I don't remember a lot of that because, like you said, I was a special fight. I was just a one fight event during that, so I know I got my pay right after the fight, and there was no complications with it, which is always a good thing. But
Yeah,
it was a pretty good fight. I think I ended up tapping him out in the third round for that fight and submitted him.
no, that's it's always like nice to fight at home, get the W. At least that show was nice in that it checked off all the boxes. Was there any problems with the ring? Because I heard that they spray painted parts of the ring on the day of the fight, and there was people coming off with black flecks and stuff. None of that played an effect for you. You don't.
No, I remember it being pretty slick in there, but aside from that,
Okay, all right, good stuff on that show because definitely a historic show. I didn't even realize that you had been a part of it, but that's definitely a cool one to talk about.
there were some big
And you
names
go,
in that fight.
for sure, yeah. Babalu, and on the
Yeah,
women's side, Amanda Buckner, who's a Denver person, fought on that show, and she was one of the best in the world at that time. So, yeah, I appreciate that show very much. You go back to Pancrase, and you get June Ishii. June had won a Abu Dhabi qualifier at some point, and but here again, the Japanese are going to struggle to come up with heavyweights that are in your class.
yeah, it was another quick fight. Went just as planned. I think I ended up choking him out with a neck weave
Yeah.
right, like probably within the first minute or two, and took the W home.
Yeah, he's one of the guys. A minute and 2 seconds, and that's Pancras Hybrid 9. What are the rules at this point? Are you doing the full out MMA, no glove, or are you still doing the open hand stuff?
No, it was closed fists. I don't think
Okay,
we were allowed to knee to the head um, in pancrase, but other than that, it was
okay,
pretty much just full MMA.
okay. Now Pancrase brings you back for the very next event. So You're there twice in a month, and this time they got to go to America to bring in your opponent. But at least it's a known quantity. You fought Jimmy Ambrose. What was this like? Jimmy, it's another one of those 300 pounders.
Yeah, he was a big boy. Um, and I went in good shape again, but it was just a really weird matchup with Jimmy and I because we were both not huge strikers, and I had a hard time taking him down to the mat. So it was probably one of the most boring fights that I've had. And for a spectator, I don't know that they were real happy with the fight because not a lot happened. I ended up
Yeah.
taking him down one time and through the ropes, and they called us back up to our feet in the middle.
Okay.
But
Now is that something
not one
that
of the greatest.
did Phyllis give you a talking to? Because sometimes
She always
come on,
wanted me to be. She always wanted to be a little bit meaner in there, and
I
I
got
was
you.
not really me.
Yeah. No, well, that it's competitive for you. I almost think of it as like the Dan Severn mentality. Like I honestly don't think Dan could tell the difference between it's competition, So
Right.
he does whatever it is the rules tell him, and you have got your adaptation of that, but the wrestlers seem to come with that. So I understand. I think I understand what you're talking about when with the meanness. Ken Shamrock had that meanness.
Sure.
Now
There's certain
here,
guys that do.
yeah, now here you go back to Pride, and now talk about talk about a mean guy. you
Yeah.
you now you're really getting to the top shelf here against Mirko Cro Cop. Talk about the build up to this fight, preparing for it, and what you knew about him.
I really wasn't intimidated going into the fight at all. It was another one of those things where I just felt like if I stuck to my game plan, got him down to the ground, there's no way he'd be able to work with me. I knew he was one of the top guys, but I didn't really follow all the hype, about the big scary leg kick and all the other stuff that came with Mirko. So it's just another big fight for me that I trained real hard for, and the fight obviously didn't go quite as expected. I was able to take him down fairly early in the fight and hold him there for quite a while until he got back up and I met that kick.
Yeah, when you get, but you knew this wasn't Chris Kondo in there. Again, no
Absolutely,
disrespect.
yeah, yeah. I
Now
knew
you're
he
facing
was.
a world class guy.
He was way more impressive on the ground than I thought he would be. He did a good job of controlling my hands and not letting me unload on him, ground and pound, and kept good position. And then he was able to kick himself out and get back to his feet, which is what I didn't want.
Yeah. Now let me
With those
ask you.
10-minute first rounds in Pride, that's a long time to fight for those big heavyweight that's weighing in at about 280 at the time of the fight.
Yeah, they didn't have that 265 limit, so you were comfortable going in about 280.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Now let me ask you: were you studying tape of Crow Cop in the buildup, or was that not your thing? Were how aware of what he bought were you?
Yeah, I was pretty aware. Mirko is one of those guys that doesn't telegraph that kick, so it's hard to, he's got it in his toolbox, but you really don't know when it's coming because he doesn't rotate his toe out to show you that kick, and it comes super fast. So
Yeah,
when you're breathing hard already, because I'd already been fighting for 4 or 5 minutes on the
yeah.
on the top and breathing pretty hard, and that kick comes out of nowhere and caught me just enough to get me spinning.
Now, how was the show, the presentation? Like, you got to be nearing being the main event here.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I mean, when you walk out there and you've got that drum wall and the Pride crowd is so cool though. There's so much more respect over in Japan than fighting in the United States, and you just get a bunch of people drinking and wanting to see blood. Over there they respect the sport. You get a little golfer's clap, when you do something respectable, and it's just such a different environment. But I always loved fighting over there, and Pride treated me extremely well.
Yeah, and this was you're actually in the main event of Pride. There's
Yeah.
how many people are peers of yours in that respect? Very few, and that's amazingly cool.
Yeah, it was
Um,
pretty cool. That 50,000 people in the arena, back then it was pretty cool feeling.
Now, what are your so you're in Pride? Are you watching guys like Sakuraba? Like, what was your who took your who made you pay attention over there? Or are you kind of like with blinders on? Talk to me.
Um, there was really nobody over there that was like, wow, I really want to work up so I can fight this guy. I was one of those guys that was just happy to take a fight, just throw a name out there, just like Mirko, out of the blue, he asked for me for a fight, and there was no way I was going to turn it down. So I
So if
just
they
took
had
every
come at
fight.
you at that point with Noguera or Fedor, obviously you got to say yes, right?
Absolutely, and I would have. Yeah, every fight they offered me, I took.
Yep. Fedor at that point was, the kind of the cream of the crop. What are your thoughts on preparing for him? What would you have stopped, or would you have just taken it for another fight, or would you have really taken it to another level?
I mean, I would have probably stepped it up as much as I could have at the time to fight him. But I mean, you saw when Kevin Randleman fought him. I mean, he was able to pick him up and slam him on his head. But that
Yeah.
dude was in his prime. He was untouchable.
Now you go back to Pancrase, you get fighting on Pancrase, and now you go back to Pride to face Kevin Randleman. Now you said you'd spent some time with Coleman and some of the Hammer House guys in the past and stuff. You've been over there a lot at this point. Maybe with a few of them and things. What was that like? Was Kevin? It's kind of like fighting a friend, no?
Yeah, and I was friends with Kevin. He was always we spent a lot of time over there in Pancras and in Pride together. I spent a lot of time with them, and they're just good dudes. And I same backgrounds. We all come from wrestling backgrounds, so a lot of similarities. So it was weird fighting Kevin just because he was a good friend of mine.
Yeah.
But
Now, go ahead.
I don't take any fight lightly. So I mean, I was going to go out and fight Kevin just like I fought everybody else, and uh, super surprised in that one when he got up under me and took me down twice because I'd never been taken down before. So
Yeah. Well, if anyone could do it, maybe Kevin might be. At least there's no shame in that.
no, no, no.
But you got the W, which is interesting. Was that any wrestling connection where maybe you had a little bit of like an idea that you were dominant or stuff? How'd that work out? Because you key locked him, and I'm also referencing that he had lost to Erickson, so like he seems to have trouble with bigger guys.
Yeah, I was just real patient with Kevin, and he took me down and controlled me for almost, geez, probably 8 minutes on top. And I was underneath him for that long, and I was just able to reserve my energy. And I was one of those guys that always knew that as the fight went on, I was going to get stronger and better, and was able to reverse him and get on top. And as soon as I did, I went right for that key lock and set him up for it. And he came up to block punches, and I caught it, and that was pretty much the end of it.
Gotcha,
But that was a
gotcha.
huge win for me.
Yeah, that's definitely a quality win in terms of recognition and everything, and also on that stage. Um,
Absolutely.
Now you come back, Pancrase, but you get another workhorse. This is Kosaka, who was Maurice Smith's training partner,
Yeah.
and back in the old days, you probably you're one of those UFC debut earlier, and you probably watched him fight Boss at 19.
Absolutely. Yeah. He fought Tim Lasik. Yeah. I saw
Yeah.
all of his fights.
So talk about that. What was he's dangerous, but he's a little smaller. What was your confidence? What was your feeling? This is Pancrase again.
Yeah. And this was for the Pancras belt. So I was super excited about it because I was going to get a chance to be the king of Pancras and get that nice belt. And this is one of the fights and probably one of the only fights that I ever fought that I felt that the results didn't go like they should have. I mean, I controlled uh, Kosaka the whole time, took him down, and somehow didn't get the win. So I was actually pretty shocked at the end of that fight when they didn't raise my hand.
Now, did they address that with you afterwards? What did Phyllis say? Because
No,
you can send Phyllis in there, send the pitbull in there.
right? Yeah, she was super upset. My corner was super upset. I mean, it was just. I mean, I've gone back and watched the fight. I mean, it's just crazy because I just
Yeah,
totally dominated the fight.
Yeah, I mean, home field's home field, and you kind of have that
Exactly.
mentality, and you know it too. So you don't sound like super pissed off, but what you're saying is you won that fight.
I really did. I mean, there was no doubt in my mind that I didn't win that fight, and to this day, I still think I won it. But like they always say, you leave it up to the judges, and it's out of your hands. So
Yeah, yeah.
that's my own fault.
And you'll get more chances here. Do you go back to Japan? I don't think that may have been your last fight in Japan.
Yeah, I think it might have been.
Interesting, interesting. So now you come back, and now you go into the WEC again, and you go back to back fights with Rico Rodriguez. What talk about this in the build-up? Rico, obviously a big name. You got the W. Why rematch him? Or tell the whole story.
Well, they gave me a super short notice on the first fight with him. I think I only had like 2 or 3 weeks. I think somebody backed out, and then they gave me the fight. But I had known that Rico was not the same fighter he was when he was fighting in the UFC, so I really wasn't that worried about him. I knew he had a lot of skills and was definitely a dangerous guy, but he wasn't in the condition that he used to be in. So I took the fight, and um, Tito Ortiz was his corner, and it was a pretty cool event. All WC events are outside, so it's an outside arena in California on an Indian reservation. So it's kind of a neat atmosphere. But it was a hard fought fight. I mean, I fought all 3 rounds and didn't have many that went into all 3 rounds. But another fight that I totally controlled the fight, took him down pretty much at will, and controlled him on the bottom, and got the win. Blatnick was the commentator that night, so it was
Cool.
it was nice to listen to him say some positive things because he wasn't usually very positive.
Yeah, and you get and a legend too at this point, Jeff. Um,
Absolutely, yeah.
so what's going on here at this point? Is Phyllis failing you because you beat Rico, even though you know Rico may have gone down the party route at this point and not
Yeah.
been on top shape. Um, it's still a good win. Why take a year off and then why rematch Rico in a year? What went on there?
I really don't remember the circumstances why. I know it was a different organization that came to me, and it was a big fight at the Staples Center in California, and they offered me a pretty significant payday for it. So I figured, I beat this guy once. I'm going to go beat him again.
Okay, and now this one is WFA, and this is called King of the Streets. And if I remember correctly, uh, Quentin Jackson was on this card. Boss Rutan may have had his last MMA fight on this card. So this was
Yeah.
another one of those things where you refer, okay, they gave you a payday, so you took the rematch, even though maybe philosophically it wasn't a great idea. You do it
Right.
for the all right. That's fair. And then you're a free agent, and then we meet because I called Phyllis and I needed a main event type of poster boy to um, do the debut fight for Roger Gracie in Bodog in Canada. Talk about your Bodog experience because this was a lot of fun for everybody. I think.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. It was actually the biggest payday that I ever signed for, which was pretty cool. Um, in fighting anybody that has the last name of Gracie, it's going to be a great fight. Um, Personally, I was going through a lot of messed up things at the time. I was right in the middle of a divorce, so ended up taking the fight fairly last minute, and just said I actually turned the fight down 2 or 3 times, and uh, then it just got so substantial that there's like I'm gonna take this fight. I'm gonna go do it. So trained for it and thinking the same thing. In hindsight, I would never have fought the same fight that I did today if I was to fight him because I could have probably beat him on my feet. But taking him to the mat right away and thinking that I'm going to catch this guy in any kind of submission was probably a little foolish of me. But again, I was bigger and stronger and thought that I could just control this guy on the bottom and just do my thing.
Yeah, and he's actually like even for the size, he's actually kind of on the weaker side. I think he must have felt like very little until the armbar.
No, but he was super. Yes, 6'4", 6'5", super tall, and great leverage, long legs. He was crawling up my back the whole time when I was up on top. I think I ended up picking him up 3 or 4 times and slamming him down in that armbar before he finally got it out to the side so far that I couldn't stop it.
Yeah, yeah. Now let's talk a little bit of fun. You said it was your best payday. And Bodog had a reputation. We wanted to make a main event fight, and you were in the running for this fight. Don Fry was in the running for this fight, so we were looking for a veteran name with a good resume, and he wanted that for his debut. So it had to be somebody with a lot of fights, and you got a
Mm-hmm.
good payday, but it's Canada, so you know. How'd you get home with that cash? Did you bring in a bunch of friends? It's 20
Yeah.
years. Nobody can say anything to us anymore. Um, but I know Phyllis was very uptight about it because I think, like you said, it was a good payday, and God bless her soul. I know she really, her percentage was good for her. She needed it.
Yeah,
So
she did.
but she was a pit bull at that point. Made sure
Yeah,
everything
I
went,
bet she was too.
and they made it happen. First, did you get Canadian dollars or did you get American dollars?
I made him pay me in US dollars.
Okay, there you
Always,
go. That's
always.
cool. So, and that was a little bit of what caused the Stern Bodog because obviously they had the money, but making it happen like that, it's like, oh snap! In 2 days we got to have that cash, and they didn't realize it. We got
Yep.
caught off guard, but it was definitely an interesting day, and having Ron standing around looking, just looking like he looks, it's like, man, we better find this guy's money.
Right.
But it all worked out well, and Bodog didn't last much longer, but we got our main event from there, and you went on to another one of those one-off shows, Art of War, on the next one, and here you fought a guy named Mario Rinaldi from American Top Team, little
Yeah.
squat guy. What was this like?
Uh, it was pretty cool. It was at the American Airlines Arena, and uh, again, it was USA versus Brazil, so it was pretty cool. And they had another one that had a lot of big names on the card. Um, I didn't know a lot about Rinaldi, but I actually flew out to Vegas and trained with Randy Couture and his team for this fight and to get ready for it.
Now,
And
why would you not have? Let me before we pause. Now you mentioned Randy. Why would you not have hooked up with wrestlers at this point? With is it? I know what the answer is because of the job and stuff, right? Yeah, because
why would I hooked
Randy
up
was there.
with
You
wrestlers?
had you had Rico Ciparelli. You had people looking for talent like yourself. That you had to get an offer from somebody. Come out to California, and you had to turn those down.
Yeah, like I said, I was married with a family, and it was just hard at that point to just pick up and take off somewhere. And I started this my whole career at 35 years old. So,
Yeah,
I'm at this point in my career when I'm fighting Mario, I'm probably 45 years old or pretty
yeah.
close. Uh, so I wasn't a spring chicken, so it's not like I'm starting my career out.
Now, do you
So
ever think if I were 10 years younger, would this would be different? Have you ever had that thought?
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Unfortunately, life can be that way. There's a generational thing. It's a very different sport now too, so it's very interesting. Um,
Yeah, my boy's fighting now, so he's just getting his start. He's 3-0.
yep, yep. We're about to get to that. Now we're coming towards the end of your career here. We're at 2007. Now you like you said, you're getting to be in your 40s and stuff. Um, you go 2-1 in your last fights. One of the loss was to Dave Herman, a young gun at that point. Did you feel that transition of like, man, I can't be doing this against guys 20 years younger than me? Was that a thought that crossed your mind? Or
No, it really wasn't. Never agent really didn't come into it for me hardly ever in my career. Maybe towards the end just a little bit, just because maybe the recovery time, but I always felt like I compete with these guys, and I had all intentions of beating Dave Herman. I didn't think that this guy could hang with me, and uh, I thought I'd easily be able to take him down and control him. I knew he was a great athlete, and I'd seen him fight quite a few times, but didn't
Okay.
expect uh didn't expect to get caught with that with another good leg kick, and got me spinning a little bit and couldn't recover from it.
Yep. He's he made his mark. He's living in France now, so
Is he
more
really?
power. Yeah, he's kind of he had a legal incident and kind of like
Yeah.
felt he was wronged and left the country, and he's not coming back. So God bless Dave Herman. So you mentioned it. Your son, well, give me your son's name. Let's talk about it, and you tell me how this came about. Because do you encourage him or do you go, don't do this? So talk
Right.
about the whole thing.
I've totally left it up to my boys what they want to do. They were both two-time state champion heavyweight wrestlers, wrestled since they were 5 years old, just super competitive and super talented kids. Um, but when my boys started training with a local team in Greeley, Colorado, I was kind of shocked. And so then I started helping him, and man, I just knew both of my boys could do very well in the sport because they're just great wrestlers and good athletes. Um, but my youngest boy's fighting at 185. He cuts down from about 210, so he cuts a lot of weight to get down to 185. But man, he just seems untouchable at this point in his career. He's training now with the UFC gym and down in Denver, and I think he's got a promising future. He's just super tough.
Now, you when you come from wrestling, you notice there are mindsets that come to this. Like, you
Yeah,
got Mark Coleman, and then you got like Mark Kerr. And then really, I think the mind is what made it different because they were both such superior athletes, right? So,
absolutely. Yeah.
does your kid have it up? Is he tough in the mind? You like what you see there? Give us his full
Yeah, I
name.
think that's probably one of his strongest attributes is he's just got such good focus, and he approaches it just like I did, kind of where it's just another wrestling match out there, and he's so used to that competition that nothing phases him. He's confident in his talent and his abilities, and nothing can persuade from that. And he just never has a doubt that he's not going to win the fight.
Now, do you think you want? Are you going to manage him, or are you going to be involved with watching over him, or
Yeah,
do
I'd
you?
like to definitely be involved. I mean, I'm not able to coach him every day like he is. He's going down to Denver and training with some of these top guys, to get that coaching. But I would definitely like to be help manage his career for sure.
Now, have you ever talked to Dana White? Have you ever not about him specifically? Ever meet the guy?
I haven't. They actually came out to my house this summer, and they did a big story on me that's going to be coming out on the UFC Fight Pass here probably in the next month or two. Where are they
Oh,
now? And they did a big story on me, and they actually came to my son's very first fight and taped it. So uh, hopefully that'll put a little bug in their ear.
yeah, good, good. No, good for him because you took a path where you like you said you could never leave your job because you just weren't going to make the money or you just don't know. And
Right.
if he's able to avoid that and really dedicate himself, who knows? The sky's the limit. Um, do you have any regrets?
Not a single one. Right in the middle of my fighting career that you may not even have remembered, but back in 2000, after fighting in the UFC, and I hadn't even been to Japan yet. The WWE came to me and offered me a contract, and I ended up signing a developmental deal with them for 4 years, and flew out to Louisville, Kentucky, and lived out there in this small group called Ohio Valley Wrestling, and was with Brock Lesnar and John Cena and Batista and Randy Orton and a bunch of the big names you see today. And so I was out there for about a year and then moved back home, and I got called up to the traveling roster in the WWE and was traveling with Dwayne Johnson, all the big names, and
Mhm.
did that for about a year. Before I got cut from that roster, and then went back and started fighting in Japan. So that was kind of right in the midst of all this mix. And back then, when I signed that contract, um, Vince McMahon wouldn't let me, do a lot of the things that the UFC was asking me to do. They wanted me to be in the second video game. They put me in the first video game, but they wanted me to be in the second one, and he wouldn't let me. And it was just UFC was so new back then that WW thought that they were just small potatoes, but
Yeah,
I was
you
probably
were.
I was one of the first.
Yeah, because here's the deal with that is you're doing MMA and you're working. And now all of a sudden you're able to go spend some time in the Ohio Valley and stuff because they're paying you a little bit better. It's just a
A whole
bigger
lot
company.
better. Yeah. Oh yeah.
So talk about a little bit about those guys. Like what was Brock like? Like, like he's a legend kind of thing, but he's quiet.
Yeah. Brock and I were real good friends, and Brock didn't have a lot of friends back then because Brock is Brock.
Yeah.
But we just hit it off right from the start, and hung out almost the whole time we were out there in Louisville together. And he actually was just at my house a couple months ago because his daughter's going to Colorado State now. But I still keep in touch with Brock. But he was a great guy to me. I love the guy, and he's one of those guys we would train, outside of the ring, and we'd go out and wrestle sometimes. And he was one of those guys that you just knew that if he jumped into this sport, he would be a force to be reckoned with. And I'm glad that he dipped into the arena, that
Yeah.
stepped into
Well,
the octagon for sure.
he's one of those guys. This is a rare statement, I think, but he's one of those guys that needed MMA a lot less than MMA needed him. You know what I
Right.
mean? Because he was
Yeah.
going to be a star anyway. You know what I mean? And so he tried it for his own reasons. I respect that. And then, you kind of got to think if he didn't have that diverticulitis, I think it's the disease.
Diverticulitis. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's serious business. If he hadn't had that, who knows what he could have done. Who else impressed you over there? Because those guys don't misunderestimate. That's I'm talking to the other people. I know you won't, but
Yeah.
that's a crazy business. In terms
It
of like
really is.
you know, how often what'd you do? Three shows a week, 5 shows a week? What?
Oh yeah, we were doing 4 or 5 shows a week. I was on the road, and I'd get home maybe 4 or 5 times a month. You're just traveling from one town to the next and driving to the next city, and it's a crazy lifestyle, man.
Yeah, like
It's
Brock
so hard
gets
on
to
your
fly,
body.
but Brock gets to
Yeah.
fly, but at your level, it's like, rent the car in Cincinnati and do the, Louisville to, Memphis to, that whole circuit by car,
Yeah,
by
when
rent.
Brock and I both got called up, we would rent cars together and drive to the next town together, and do it all over again, find a local gym and train. And but yeah, it's tough on your body. You don't get breaks. You if you're sore and tired, you still get into the ring the next night and you do it all over again. You
Yeah.
can see how
What,
guys can get hooked on painkillers and all the hard stuff that comes along with that business, because it's hard on you.
is that, you know, I, physically, obviously you could have done it, but is that why you kind of let it go a little bit because of all the baggage you see?
Yeah, it was probably all this. I was a brand new Christian at the time, and it was just a hard lifestyle to be in as a
Yeah.
as a believer. Yeah, with 2 kids at home and not seeing them, and I'm missing the wrestling matches, and there's a lot of things going against me. But it would have. I always think about what it would have been like if I would have made it up there, um, but it all worked out the way it was supposed to. So
Yeah. Not to joke around, but you could have stolen like Ryback's character.
yeah, there's lots of characters I think that I could have played.
For sure, you know what I mean? It's like that always has a place in pro wrestling. So, did you ever get to do pro wrestling in Japan? Did that ever come up?
I did. I went over and wrestled for New Japan Pro Wrestling. I did, I think, 3 or 4 tours over there. Um, that was a fun experience too, getting to wrestle some of the top names in New Japan Pro Wrestling. And for them, it was just tours. So I would go over there for a couple weeks at a time and do a bunch of tours, and then come back home and then fly back over again. And it was a lot of fun.
Cool. And that's good that you get the crossover because that's the perks of Japan is that when they like you, and sometimes being a heavyweight helps.
Yeah.
They get you those extra gigs and stuff, and that's what really pays off. Um, so when are we going to see your kid in the UFC? Because you said he's 3-0. What do you want to? What's your perfect path for him?
Um, I think it's probably going to take him 7 or 8 impressive wins with some real tough opponents. And right now he's just starting to take his next step up, and I think to into some tougher opponents, and I think he'll start to get recognized. But he's training really hard, and he's kind of living like I did, where he's got to support his family. He's got 3 little girls and a beautiful wife, and he's got to support his family at the same time. So he's training at night. He gets up in the morning before his workday starts at 4:30 in the morning and runs, and he's doing everything that it takes to get to the next level. So I'm super proud of him.
That's awesome to hear. So, what are you doing nowadays? You said you're a fireman.
Yeah, I'm actually on shift right now. I'm glad we haven't gotten any calls in the last hour because
I'm grateful. I'm grateful. So, but that's awesome because my ex partner Chris Lytle's a fireman. There are a bunch of
yeah.
Stipe and stuff. It's like firemen are underrated tough guys. I think for sure. What about the gym? Do you still go to the gym? Do you train the UFC training set? Do you pop your head in there every once in a while?
Yeah, I try to get with my boy and train with him as much as I can and roll with him. But as far as the other gyms, I mean, I've got a gym at my house now. I've got 10 acres and 3 horses and a nice gym that I've got set up. So I pretty much trade at home, but I stay in pretty good shape.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
still about 275.
wow. Okay, so you haven't done like the Mark Coleman and gone down to about 220, more of a natural weight. Are you how many calories do you eat a day? Come on, man.
Oh, I'm
275.
probably about 5 or 6 thousand calories a day.
Okay, so you're a bodybuilder then still.
Yeah, I try to stay pretty lean and in good shape, but more
Yeah.
more of my training now is just for functional muscle. I don't need to look good and uh, be in bodybuilder shape, but I still like to be in good cardiovascular shape and
Are you
do my
into
stuff.
strength too? Like, do you test yourself like uh oh, I'm gonna forget his name. He's a guy who's fought all over the Midwest, but now he's about 52, 53 years old. He's a power lifter, and that's what he gets his buzz from and stuff. Was that something that you enjoy? Strongest man in the
I
world kind of thing?
Yeah, I do a lot of that stuff with the strength team. I travel with a team called Team Impact, and we do feats of strength, where we're lifting telephone poles over our heads and breaking out of handcuffs and breaking metal baseball bats over our legs and just some crazy feats of strength. So that kind of stuff is a lot of fun for me, and I do that quite a bit. I was just in Oklahoma for 5 days doing that last week.
Do you get recognized a lot, like as a UFC fighter?
Not as much as I used to, but I still do occasionally.
Okay, okay, that's cool. That's cool. Now, I want to thank you very much for your time, man. We've taken up about an hour, and that's about what we like to do here. Um, I feel like we could keep talking though. This was great, man.
Yeah,
Thank you.
right.
Um, I look forward to seeing your kid fight, and I look forward to seeing you in his corner, man. You're actually one of the inspirational stories. You mentioned briefly that that you were Christian and stuff, but you are definitely on the internet, and your social media and stuff is definitely the real deal. You're geared toward that, and your life. You say you got 10 acres. I'm always happy when I contact people and I'm not running into tragedies like in boxing, the old boxers and stuff. And
Yeah.
everybody we can check off as a positive story. I'm happy for, and you are one of them, my friend. Thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate it, buddy. God is
Cool.
good, man.
Yeah, exactly. Let me end it on that and let you go back to work. Okay.
Thanks, Miguel. Bless you,
Yes, sir.
buddy.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you.